Have you ever walked into a room and without saying a single word you felt it? The shift, the tension, the silent stares, as if your very presence was too loud for someone else's comfort. Not because you did something wrong, but because who you are quietly challenges who they pretend to be. Not all hatred comes wrapped in insults or raised voices. Some of it wears a smile. Some of it nods politely while secretly hoping you stumble. Some of it stays quiet, simmering beneath the surface, but you feel it, don't you? Today we're diving deep into a truth many overlook. Why some people secretly resent you, and why it often has nothing to do with anything you've done. It's not your fault, but it might be your light. Stoic wisdom teaches us that the world reacts to more than just our actions. It reacts to what we represent. And for some, that representation is painful, because in your progress, in your confidence, in your self-discipline, they see a mirror they didn't ask for, a mirror that reflects not your flaws, but their unfulfilled potential. 1. Of the most toxic and silent forces behind resentment is envy, the kind that doesn't shout, but festers. It often starts as admiration. They respect your discipline, your ambition, your clarity. But over time that respect twists. Why? Because instead of being inspired, they start feeling exposed. Your success highlights their stagnation. Your peace disrupts their chaos. Your confidence makes their insecurity impossible to ignore. And when people feel exposed, they protect themselves the only way they know how, by tearing others down. Not always with direct attacks, but with whispers behind your back, with passive-aggressive comments, with subtle attempts to undermine you, to shrink your light so theirs doesn't look so dim. You didn't ask for this comparison. You didn't provoke this battle. But the moment you became a reflection of what's possible, you became a threat to their comfort zone. And that's why you need to understand this. Their hate is not your burden. Number 1, their envy is not your responsibility. You don't need to dim your light just because someone else hasn't found theirs yet. This is the silent danger of envy. Not the loud kind that explodes, but the kind that festers beneath polite words and tight-lipped smiles. It's the emotion that turns someone's private dissatisfaction into subtle hostility aimed in your direction. You feel the chill in their tone, the hesitation in their gaze, but they never say it out loud. And that makes it harder to confront. What makes it more painful is its ambiguity, the confusion. You begin to question yourself. Did I say something wrong? Was it my success, my presence, that changed the atmosphere? Without clear answers, you risk internalizing that hostility. You carry a weight that was never yours to hold, and that's exactly where Stoic wisdom steps in, like a lighthouse in emotional fog. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength." Their resentment, not your responsibility. Their inner war is not a battle you were meant to fight. You don't owe anyone an apology for becoming who you are. You don't need to tone down your voice, your ambition, or your light, just because someone else hasn't yet discovered their own. Walk forward, not with arrogance, but with integrity. Let your growth be graceful. Let your presence be steady. Let your values speak louder than any defense ever could, because when you remain grounded, rooted in who you are, you gain clarity. You start to see that envy is not an attack, but a reveal, a glimpse into someone else's struggle with self-worth. So respond not with ego, but with poise, not with anger, but with stillness, not with guilt, but with discernment. When you realize that envy is often pain in disguise, you can meet it with firm compassion, boundaries wrapped in wisdom. You're not here to fix it. You're only here to not absorb it. Focus on what you can control: your energy, your words, your peace, your purpose. Envy might be inevitable, but letting it disturb your mind. That's a choice, and that's the Stoic way. But envy isn't always the culprit. Sometimes resentment doesn't stem from jealousy or insecurity. Sometimes it begins in silence, in a simple misunderstanding. Many tensions that slowly erode relationships don't come from betrayal. They come from misalignment. Two people seeing the same moment from two completely different angles and never realizing it. A word said too quickly, a message misheard, a gesture misread. You meant to show concern, but they heard criticism. You meant to help, but they felt judged. And from that tiny crack, a quiet fire starts to burn. Sometimes it's not what was said, but what wasn't clarified, that leads two people down separate emotional paths. What begins as a misunderstanding can quietly evolve into a story that never should have been written. Maybe you were just quiet that day, lost in thought, recharging. But to someone else, that silence was a statement. They read your stillness as coldness. They mistook your boundaries for arrogance. They saw distance and assumed disinterest. In the eyes of the Stoics, perception is everything. Not just what happens to us, but how we interpret it, how we absorb it, and most importantly, how we respond. Marcus Aurelius once reflected, "Everything we hear is an opinion, not a fact. Everything we see is a perspective, not the truth." But here's the trap. Most people don't slow down to examine their interpretations. They don't ask, "Could I be wrong? Is there another explanation?" Instead, they build stories, entire narratives, around a single moment they misunderstood. A glance, a delayed reply, a tone of voice just slightly off, and before long, those stories become their truth. They don't see you as you are. They see a version of you they've created in their mind, a version shaped by confusion, uncertainty, and unspoken assumptions. He doesn't care anymore. She's changed. They think they're better than me. These aren't facts, they're fictions born from silence, and yet, once that narrative is formed, it sticks. Why? Because the mind craves consistency. It resists being corrected. It prefers being certain over being curious. Even if the story is wrong, the comfort of believing it feels easier than facing the vulnerability of being mistaken. That's the painful irony. People begin to resent you, not for what you did, but for what they believe you did. And in their world, that belief is real. Their pain is real. Their judgment feels justified. This is the silent destruction caused by ineffective communication. It doesn't just confuse, it divides. And that's why Stoicism doesn't stop at mastering emotions. It calls us to master our words, to think with clarity, to speak with intention, to listen with presence, to never assume that what we meant is exactly what someone else heard. So what do? We clarify, we ask, we listen before we react. And when we feel misjudged, we don't rush to defend. We gently investigate where the disconnect began. Seneca reminds us, we suffer more often in imagination than in reality. Sometimes all it takes to prevent that suffering is one honest conversation. So much of the tension we feel in life doesn't come from truth, but from interpretation. And as we saw before, miscommunication doesn't just confuse, it quietly rewrites relationships. Now let's look deeper at what happens when that misunderstanding becomes someone else's new reality. That person who's grown distant, who suddenly greets you with cold politeness or avoids your presence entirely. They're not reacting to you. They're reacting to their version of you, one crafted through filtered perception, unspoken assumptions, and emotional projection. And as long as that perception is never questioned, it becomes their lens, their story, their justification. They may speak about you with bitterness. They may carry tension in your presence without a word exchanged. But beneath all of it, lies a story they wrote about you, not with you. So how do we address that? Contrary to instinct, the answer isn't always confrontation. You don't need to burst in with accusations or demand an apology. Sometimes the real courage lies in gentle clarity, in being brave enough to ask, not accuse. It could be as simple as, "I felt a shift between us, can we talk?" Not to prove yourself, not to fix everything, but to invite truth into a space where assumption has taken root. Yet, and this is important, not everyone will accept that invitation. Some people cling more tightly to the story they've created than to the possibility of understanding, because in their version, they are the victim. And the truth might challenge that comfort. That's where the Stoic path becomes clear. You cannot force growth where there is pride. You cannot plant seeds of connection if the soil is not open. But you can walk away in peace, knowing you chose understanding over ego. You can rest easy, knowing you didn't contribute to the fracture through silence, neglect, or avoidance. So if you feel someone harbors unspoken resentment toward you, ask not just, "What did I do?" but rather, "What might have been misunderstood?" Approach it with humility, not guilt. Speak with clarity, not lengthy defense. And remember, most broken bonds aren't torn by hatred. They fade in the fog of miscommunication. In a world that rushes to assume and hesitates to ask, your willingness to understand can be the bridge that turns tension into truth and possibly even healing. But sometimes, the reason they resist you goes beyond words, beyond tone, beyond misunderstanding. Sometimes it has nothing to do with what you said or how you said it, but simply who you are. That leads us to a deeper, more complex cause of hidden resentment, a difference in values, because beneath every interaction, each of us carries an invisible mosaic, a personal constellation of beliefs shaped by where we were born, how we were raised, what we've survived, and what we secretly long for. And when your existence challenges someone else's worldview, even silently, it can stir discomfort they don't yet know how to name. When your very existence challenges someone's worldview, even silently, it's not always welcome. Sometimes it's not the words you speak, but the values you live by that stir discomfort in others. Diversity of thought, belief, and experience is what makes the human story so rich, complex, and beautifully layered. But let's not pretend it's always easy, because when your values don't just differ from someone else's, but challenge their unexamined truths, silent tension can begin to form. You see, people are rarely threatened by facts. They're threatened by what those facts might imply about who they are. It's not just about politics or religion. It's about presence. It's about how you carry yourself, the quiet integrity in your choices, the discipline in your lifestyle, the calm conviction in your voice. To someone who's unsure of their own path, your certainty can feel like a spotlight. And what happens when a light shines on something someone isn't ready to face? They recoil. They misread your intention. They don't see a difference, they see a defiance. They don't hear another perspective. They feel provoked. Suddenly, a simple moment of contrast becomes perceived judgment. Your discipline becomes their insecurity. Your silence feels like silent condemnation. Your growth becomes a mirror, and in that mirror they don't like what they see. This is why passive aggression arises in the smallest moments. Why people who once smiled warmly now keep their distance. Why conversations become colder, shorter, or disappear altogether. And yet, this isn't always about malice. As Epictetus reminds us, every person is a product of their upbringing, their circumstances, their wounds. Their beliefs are not always chosen but inherited, not always born from truth but from repetition, not always shaped by logic but by the survival instinct, the need to belong, to feel safe, to feel seen. So when someone feels challenged, even silently, They may react not from their best self, but from their most wounded one. And yes, that's why even the kindest person can suddenly become cold. Not because you did anything wrong, but because you represent something unresolved within them. From a Stoic lens, the wise response isn't to correct or convert, it's to understand. Disagreement is not always an invitation to debate. Difference is not always a challenge to overcome. You are not required to adopt another person's worldview, but you're also not obligated to prove you're superior. The moment you understand that people believe what they do for a reason, often rooted in fear, pain, or longing, is the moment you stop seeing them as enemies and start seeing them as humans. Still, wisdom doesn't mean surrender. Not all bridges can be built. There will be moments when honoring your values will cost you connection, when keeping the peace would mean betraying yourself, and that is a price the Stoic refuses to pay. But even then, hold firm with grace, not contempt. Stand your ground, not to dominate, but to remain rooted, because you don't need others to kneel for your truth to matter. You only need to live it, with quiet strength, unshaken by noise and untouched by pride. When your truth unsettles someone else's illusion, you won't always be met with applause. Sometimes it's not defiance they're reacting to, it's their fear of what they don't understand. Resentment born from differences in values doesn't grow because of the difference itself. It grows because of the lack of effort to bridge it. Most people don't hate what's different. They hate what they can't explain, what they don't understand, what challenges the comfort of their worldview. But instead of leaning in, instead of asking questions, they judge, they pull back, they react, and that's where resentment festers, not in conflict, but in the absence of honest conversation. When assumptions take the place of empathy, when silence becomes armor, when curiosity is choked out by fear. So what do you do when your values quietly offend others? When your integrity becomes someone else's discomfort? You don't shrink. You don't shout. You simply live your truth, fully but gently. Let your life be your message, not a billboard, not a battle cry. Just the quiet embodiment of what you believe. Because no matter how carefully you speak, there are people who will still misunderstand you. Not because your words are unclear, but because they're listening through the filter of their own wounds. In those moments, release the need for approval. Anchor yourself in the only validation that truly matters, your own. As Stoics, we accept this world won't always mirror our values, and that's a hidden blessing. Sameness may feel safe, but difference teaches, it stretches. Our patience sharpens our compassion and forges resilience that doesn't flinch under scrutiny. So when someone despises you for your convictions, don't take it as a sign of failure. Take it as a reflection of their own uncertainty. You don't need to convince. You don't need to correct. You simply need to walk your path with quiet strength and unwavering clarity. In a divided world, tolerance is a form of power. In a world drowning in noise, listening is a form of leadership. And in a world paralyzed by fear, living your truth without apology, that's rebellion, that's revolution. So let them misunderstand you. Let them wrestle with the discomfort of your difference. You are not here to be easily understood. You are here to be authentic. And in that authenticity, yes, you will lose people, but you will never lose yourself. But difference isn't the only reason people turn cold. Sometimes what poisons a relationship isn't what you did at all. It's what someone else said you did. That brings us to something far more subtle, but just as destructive. The influence of rumors. Gossip doesn't roar, it whispers, it doesn't confront you. It corrodes you, quietly behind closed doors. Many times the hatred someone feels toward you has nothing to do with you, and everything to do with the stories they've been fed. Stories twisted, exaggerated, or flat out false. But Once released, they spread like wildfire, often faster than the truth ever could. Rumors are like a slow-acting poison. They drip into conversations unnoticed. They grow with every retelling. And before long, you're wearing a version of yourself that you never chose. You become a character in someone else's narrative, often the villain, while the people listening begin to judge you, withdraw from you, resent you. All without ever asking you. Gossip doesn't just distort the truth, it replaces it. In the silence where facts should stand, whispers take root, and they grow fast. What makes gossip so dangerous isn't its volume, it's its subtlety. It doesn't need evidence, it doesn't need proof. It only needs to feel true. And in a world that moves at the speed of headlines and half-heard sound bites, what feels true often outweighs what is true. People aren't always drawn to truth. They're drawn to confirmation. Confirmation of what they already suspect. Confirmation of the insecurities they carry. Confirmation of the biases they've never questioned. So when a rumor lands softly into the ear of someone already unsure of you, it doesn't get challenged. It gets adopted, internalized, spread. In a world addicted to the sensational, a whisper. Chev's scandal travels faster and sticks longer than a library full of facts, and that's why gossip survives. Not because it's accurate, but because it's interesting. And perhaps the most painful part of being the subject of gossip is that you end up defending yourself not against something you did, but against a version of you that never existed. A version built from fragments, from assumptions, from shadows. And how do you fight shadows? You don't. You try to speak your truth, but the room's already full of echoes. You try to be honest, but the judgment came before the conversation. And that's where the Stoic path becomes not just philosophy, but protection. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "If you are distressed by anything external, the pain is not due to the thing itself, but to your estimate of it. And this you have the power to revoke at any moment. You can't control every whisper in every room. You can't chase down every misinterpretation. You can't defend yourself in conversations you were never invited to. But you can control your response. You can choose peace over panic. You can let the quiet force of your integrity speak louder than any noise. Let them talk. Let them guess. Let them assume. Your job is not to run after every lie. That's a race, with no finish line. It will drain your energy and never return your peace. Your real task is simple. Stay grounded in who you truly are. Let the consistency of your character tell the story, because Stoic wisdom reminds us, your reputation is just a shadow. It follows you, but it is not you. The real you, the substance, is found in your virtue. And no gossip, no rumor, and no twisted story can touch that unless you let it. Yes, it stings to be misunderstood. Yes, it cuts to be judged unfairly. But you know what hurts even more? To betray yourself, just to earn the approval of those who never asked for the truth. Every moment you spend worrying about what they think, you give power to a narrative that doesn't deserve it. But the moment you reclaim your attention, when you place your focus not on whispers, but on wisdom, not on rumors, but on reason, that's when you rise. When you stop reacting to the noise, you begin to rise above it. And when you stop chasing rumors, your presence begins to speak for itself. So what do you do when your name becomes the subject of gossip? You don't shrink. You don't shout. You rise. With even more clarity, even more grace, and even more discipline. You speak with intentionality. You act with unwavering integrity. You hold yourself in a way that doesn't demand attention, but commands respect. Because in the face of distortion, there are three quiet weapons that never fail. Time, truth, and consistency. Lies may travel fast, but truth travels deep. It may take longer to arrive. But when it does, it lands where it matters most, in the hearts of those who are always willing to see clearly. Seneca once said, A good character, once established, is not easily overthrown. The ones who truly know your soul, they won't be moved by whispers, and the ones who are easily swayed, they never truly knew you to begin with, so in the end you lose nothing real by staying loyal to the truth of who you are. Let the world have its gossip. Let the insecure reach for power in the shadows. Let the irrelevant stir drama to feel noticed. You don't need to descend into that pit. Your poise is your protest. Your silence, when rooted in self-respect, is not weakness. It's a boundary. It says, I do not waste my energy defending myself against shadows. So stand tall, stay grounded, keep showing up as the truest version of you, day after day, unmoved, unapologetic, unchanged. Because in the long run, it's not the one who shouts the loudest who wins. It's the one who endures with quiet strength and a clean heart. But gossip isn't the only force working in silence. There's another, even more subtle, even more personal, insecurity. This is the fifth reason people may secretly resent you. And the most corrosive part? You might never see it coming, because insecurity doesn't always wear a hostile face. Sometimes it comes wrapped in small talk, polite smiles, even applause. But beneath that surface where something darker simmers, bitterness, jealousy, resentment. And the hardest part? It's not even about you. It's about how they feel about themselves when they're around you, when someone hasn't yet faced their own fears, regrets, or sense of inadequacy. Those emotions don't disappear. They look for release, and all too often, that release becomes projection. Instead of turning inward with honesty, they look outward for someone to blame. Someone who seems too confident, too stable, too clear about who they are. And you become the mirror, not of who they are, but of who they wish they could be, or fear they never will be. This isn't always intentional. It's not always cruel. Sometimes it's not even conscious. It's a psychological reflex. But just because it's unconscious doesn't mean it's harmless. Seneca warned us, we are more often frightened than hurt, and we suffer more in imagination than in reality. And nowhere is that truer than with insecurity. When someone feels insecure about their achievements, their appearance, their intelligence, or even just their sense of belonging, the presence of someone who seems grounded becomes not just uncomfortable but threatening. Not because you did anything, but because your very being, your calm, your presence, your strength, reminds them of what they've yet to find within themselves. When someone's insecurity is stirred by your presence, it's not always visible, but it often speaks through silence, distance, or subtle judgment. And more often than not, it has nothing to do with you. Without meaning to, you become a mirror. Not a mirror of who they are, but a reflection of everything they've avoided facing. Their unlived dreams, their buried disappointments, their forgotten ambition. And instead of confronting what the mirror shows them, they try to break the mirror, not out of cruelty, but out of emotional reflex. It could be a co-worker whose smile fades the moment your work gets praised, a friend who used to cheer for you, but now finds ways to downplay your wins, a family member who mocks your goals under the disguise of just being realistic. It's not your success they resent. It's what your success reminds them of, what they haven't started, what they didn't finish, what they once believed in but let go. This has nothing to do with what you've done wrong, and everything to do with the discomfort your growth awakens in them. So when they feel threatened, when that inner storm builds with no direction, it needs somewhere to go. And too often, that target becomes you. That's projection in its purest form. It's easier to resent your confidence than to acknowledge their own self-doubt. It's easier to mock your discipline than to confront their own complacency. And it's far easier to criticize you than to do the work to reclaim what they've lost within themselves, and if left unchecked, that quiet discomfort doesn't just stay discomfort. It mutates, it simmers, it hardens into resentment, and sometimes it becomes hate. But here's what Stoicism offers in these moments: a lifeline of clarity. Their projection is not your problem to fix. You are not responsible for shrinking yourself just to make others feel taller. Marcus Aurelius put it simply: if someone is able to show me that what I think or do is not right, I will gladly change. But if they simply criticize without reason, I will hold to my course. You are not here to carry the burden of others' wounds. You are here to walk your path, with grace, with clarity, with grounded purpose. Even when your light unsettles, those still lost in their shadow. But here's the beauty in understanding all this. When you see the roots of someone's hostility, when you realize their attack is a cry of pain, not power, you begin to take it less personally. That shift, there's where your peace begins. No, it doesn't excuse their behavior. No, it doesn't mean you allow disrespect. Stoicism is not passive. It is not about becoming a doormat. It's about becoming immovable. A person of principle who protects their energy, sets firm boundaries, and still leads with quiet compassion. Because you can protect your peace while still responding with wisdom. You can say no without anger. You can walk away without bitterness. And you can choose not to retaliate, not because you're weak, but because you know the attack was never truly about you. The world is full of people walking around with invisible wounds. They carry pain they've never named. And sometimes, just sometimes, your light brushes against their shadow, and it stings. Some will be inspired by your glow. Others will recoil from it, but your role was never to manage their reaction. Your role is simple. Keep shining, because the more you honor your truth, the more you quietly give others permission to finally start facing theirs. So if someone resents your light, remember this: it's not because of your brightness, but because they haven't yet healed their darkness. Those who are truly ready, ready to grow, ready to reflect, ready to heal, they'll remember you not for how you defended yourself, but for how you stood your ground without needing to raise your voice. Because the hate born from someone else's insecurity, that's not your reflection. It's the echo of a fear they haven't yet faced. So don't shrink. Don't silence your voice or second-guess your peace. Stand tall. Keep walking. Let your calm presence be living proof that strength doesn't always roar, and sometimes it stands still. And that, my friend, is the Stoic way. But there's another reason why resentment takes root. One we don't often speak about: a lack of empathy. In a world guided by logic, we'd like to believe people walk through life with open hearts, that most are eager to understand each other, to offer grace, to listen beyond words. But the truth is, many don't. And that absence of empathy, it builds walls faster than hatred ever could. When someone lacks the willingness or the capacity to step into your perspective, they stop seeing you as a human being and start seeing you as an obstacle, a threat, a symbol. Empathy isn't just about feeling what someone else feels. It's the courage to ask, what might they be carrying that I can't see? It's the humility to recognize that behind every action there's a story. But without that empathy, people will misread your silence as arrogance, your boundary as rejection, your success as a personal attack. What began as a neutral moment, even a kind exchange, sours. Not because of what you did, but because of what they couldn't understand. And that's where quiet hostility is born, from assumptions left unchallenged, from judgments made in haste, from the inability to imagine a world outside their own lens. A person who cannot stretch their view to include yours will default to suspicion. They won't ask what's behind your behavior. They'll label it, dismiss it, And from there, resentment festers. But this isn't just a failure of emotion. It's a failure of perception. As Stoics, we learn the pain we carry often comes not from events themselves, but from the meaning we attach to them. And those who lack empathy, they attach the wrong meanings far too easily. They see life in black or white, friend or enemy, right or wrong, for me or against me. No nuance, no curiosity, just sharp conclusions drawn from shallow understanding. But here's the Stoic reminder. That isn't your burden. That isn't your responsibility. Your duty is not to teach empathy to the unwilling. Your duty is to live with clarity and compassion, even when misunderstood. Because even when empathy is absent, your integrity must remain. When empathy is absent, misjudgment takes its place. And those who can't step outside their own perspective often make you the villain in a story they wrote alone. Because they never slow down to consider the complexity of others, they confuse nuance for threat. They see your silence as judgment, your boundaries as arrogance, your different way of being as a challenge to their identity. That black and white lens, the for me or against me mindset, creates a dangerous dynamic. You become the antagonist in a narrative you never chose, the target in a war you never started. But why? Because some people are so deeply absorbed in their own storyline, they have no room for yours. When the emotional world revolves solely around their needs, their validation, their beliefs, there's no space left for genuine connection. And when they can't connect with you, they start to devalue you. Your pain? Inconvenient. Your joy? Threatening. Your presence? A disruption to their illusion of control. In that emotional vacuum, coldness settles in. A coldness that, from the outside, feels indistinguishable from hate. But here's where Stoic wisdom becomes your compass. Not every act of hostility deserves a reaction. Not every misjudgment needs a rebuttal. Marcus Aurelius once reminded himself, "You always have the option of having no opinion." That includes the opinions of people who refuse to see beyond their own projections, who misunderstand not because you were unclear, but because they were unwilling to look closer. So when someone resents you because they can't understand you, remember, that's not your flaw, it's their limitation, and the power lies in that awareness. You don't have to prove your heart to someone who's never tried to hear it. That is not weakness, that is poise, that is discipline, because Stoicism doesn't harden you, it refines you, it doesn't numb your heart, it sharpens your clarity. Understanding where resentment really comes from doesn't make you bitter. It makes you compassionate and careful. You stop internalizing wounds that were never yours to carry. You stop explaining yourself to those committed to misunderstanding you. You begin choosing your responses instead of reacting from pain. You offer empathy where it's safe to offer, and where it's not, you set your boundary and you walk away, not with revenge, not with guilt, but with peace, the kind that doesn't need applause to feel real. Because at its core, empathy is a bridge. Some people will build it with you. Others, they'll burn it before you ever take a step. Your role is not to convince them to see you clearly. Your role is to stay centered, to protect your peace, and to never blur your own vision just because someone else refuses to open their eyes. That's not indifference. That's freedom. That's the Stoic way. But there's another shadow often underestimated, one that hides behind smiles and handshakes, and slowly corrodes connection from the inside out. Competition, especially when it quietly transforms into rivalry. Sometimes it's not a lack of empathy that divides us, but a quiet competition no one ever admits. Yet everyone feels. Not all competition is unhealthy. At its best, it pushes us forward, sharpens our focus, inspires discipline, and reminds us that we're capable of more than we thought. But there's another kind of competition, one that doesn't inspire. But corrodes, it's subtle, it's unspoken, and it's driven not by growth but by comparison. This isn't the kind of healthy rivalry where two people elevate each other. This is the darker version, the one rooted in insecurity, ego, and quiet resentment. You'll find it everywhere, in offices, in friend groups, even within families. And when that drive to improve gets tangled with fear, with pride, or with wounds never healed, competition mutates into something toxic. It stops being about getting better and becomes about bringing someone else down. How can I grow is replaced with how can I make them shrink? That shift from self-mastery to sabotage is where everything changes. It rarely starts with open attacks. Most of the time, it shows up quietly, in backhanded compliments, in muted celebrations, in subtle jabs dressed as jokes. It's the colleague who claps for your success but avoids eye contact, the friend who disappears when your life starts improving, the sibling who always has to one-up you, not because they're inspired, but because they feel threatened. And the most dangerous part? These rivalries don't need to be spoken to cause damage. Their silence is their weapon. Their hidden nature is what makes them so corrosive. Marcus Aurelius warned us, the craving for recognition, the constant comparison, erodes virtue, because when you focus more on being seen than being true, you lose yourself. When competition becomes obsession, you stop measuring progress by your own growth and start measuring it by how much you outshine someone else. And suddenly, their success no longer feels earned. It feels like an injustice, like something that should have been yours. That twisted belief, left unchecked, can lead to something darker. Gossip, sabotage, deliberate attempts to discredit someone who never harmed you, simply because their light made you feel small. But the Stoic path, it offers a better way. It reminds us, there is no honor in winning by harming others. True strength is not measured by how many people you pass, but by how faithfully you stay aligned with your own values, even when no one is watching, even when someone else is applauded and you are overlooked. As Epictetus taught, the only competition worth having is with yourself, to be better today than you were yesterday, not better than your friend, not better than your rival, not even better than those who resent you, just better than the version of you who started this journey. So if someone secretly resents your success, know this. It's not your victory they're offended by. It's the mirror you hold up. A mirror that quietly reflects their doubts, their delay, their unfulfilled potential. In that moment, you are not a threat. You are a symbol of what they fear they can't become, and what deep down they still long to be. So what do you do when your success stirs quiet resentment? You don't shrink. You rise, not in defiance, but in grace. The answer is not to dim your light so others feel comfortable. The answer is to let it shine, steadily, humbly, without apology. Hold your posture with grace, not pride, with clarity, not the need for explanation, because your light is not the problem. Their discomfort is not your assignment to fix. There is space in this world for all of us to grow. Someone else's rise does not threaten your own. Their achievements don't subtract from your potential. Their applause doesn't silence your voice. Their path is simply theirs. Yours is yours. And once you truly see this, you stop competing out of fear. You learn to admire without envy, to chase your purpose without comparison, to stand tall, not by stepping on others, but by standing rooted in who you are. That is the kind of strength Stoicism teaches, not the kind that dominates, but the kind that disciplines the self. That leads quietly. That doesn't need a spotlight to feel real. So if you find yourself the target of rivalry, of projections, of silent battles you never entered, keep walking. Let your actions do the speaking. Let your character do the work. Let your peace speak louder than their pride. Compete with no one but your former self. And when others try to drag you into their quiet war, don't respond with armor. Respond with something rarer, peace, because real power doesn't crush its rivals. It simply outgrows them, quietly, calmly, unshaken. But not all resentment comes from competition. Sometimes people don't resent you for what you've achieved, but for what you refuse to become. That brings us to another hidden trigger: social expectations. Sometimes resentment is not personal, it's cultural. It's the invisible weight of should. You should live this way. You should choose that career. You should follow tradition. In communities where conformity is praised, where success follows a familiar script, anyone who chooses differently becomes a disruption. Not because they're trying to provoke, but simply because their existence challenges the system. Maybe you walk away from a stable job to chase a calling. Maybe you love differently, think differently, live differently, and suddenly your very presence becomes a quiet confrontation. You didn't challenge their beliefs with words, but with how you live, and in doing so, you hold up a mirror. A mirror they never asked for, a mirror that reflects the parts of their life built not on truth, but on expectation. Seneca once said, "It is not the man who has too little, but the man who craves more, that is poor." And in the same way, it's not the one who strays from the path who is lost. It's the one who never dared to leave it. Yet society often flips this truth. We are taught to fear what's unfamiliar, to resent what doesn't match, to protect the rules, even when they cost us our authenticity. But a Stoic knows, peace does not come from fitting in. Peace comes from alignment with your values, your truth, your soul. Your life is yours, not your family's, not your culture's, not even the voices that say, "We only want what's best for you." When you dare to step off the well-worn path, you don't just walk differently, you remind others that they could have too. True strength isn't loud. It doesn't beg for applause or approval. It chooses integrity over acceptance, meaning over permission. And yes, some will quietly dislike you for that. Not because you've wronged them, not because you failed, but because you represent something they never had the courage to become. Your authenticity becomes a silent confrontation. Your refusal to conform reminds them of all the times they did. But don't let that shift your path. Walk on. Walk with quiet confidence. Let them. Cling to comfort, to tradition, to the safety of expectations if they must. But don't let them chain you to a life that was never meant for you. You were not born to live someone else's idea of success. You were not made to fit into a mold carved by fear and repetition. You were born to live deeply, to speak honestly, to love fully, to choose freedom, the kind rooted in soul, not society. That is Stoic freedom, and that is true power. But even the strongest among us can feel a quieter kind of pain, the pain not of attack, but of absence. That brings us to another hidden root of resentment, the lack of recognition. There's a wound that festers in silence, not because of direct conflict, but because of being unseen, unnoticed, unacknowledged, uncelebrated. It's subtle but powerful. When your effort goes unseen for too long, when your consistency becomes expected rather than appreciated, something begins to wither inside. And that quiet erosion can become something darker. Bitterness, not just toward the situation, but toward the people who seem to be seen, heard, and valued, while you are not. In competitive spaces, offices, families, friendships, even social media, this hunger for recognition runs deep. Imagine someone who gives, supports, shows up again and again, but never hears, "I see you. You matter." They may not voice it, But inside a quiet storm begins to gather. They don't see me. They only praise him. I guess I never mattered, and that inner dialogue becomes dangerous, a breeding ground for quiet hostility. As Epicurus once said, the acknowledgement of one's effort is often more satisfying than the reward itself. But what happens when that acknowledgement never comes? The need doesn't disappear, it mutates into quiet comparisons, subtle envy, or open disdain for those who do get noticed. Even when you've done nothing wrong, that's when resentment slips in unnoticed. Not because of who you are, but because your presence reminds someone of how invisible they feel. But here's what Stoic wisdom reveals. Recognition is deeply subjective. To one person, a nod is enough. To another, even praise feels like an afterthought. Some crave validation like oxygen. Others carry invisible wounds from decades of being overlooked, and when they see you being seen, they mistake your light for their shadow. But now you know, their resentment? It's almost never about you. Sometimes, it's not about who you are, but about what you represent. To those who feel unseen, your light becomes a reminder of what they silently long for. More often than not, resentment isn't truly about you. It's about the symbol you've become, the fulfillment they're still chasing, the applause they never received, the validation they crave but never ask for, the peace you carry that they secretly wish was theirs. This is why communication matters. A single word of recognition, a quiet thank you, a glance that says, I see you. Sometimes that's all it takes to shift the course of a connection, to transform silent tension into mutual understanding. But if that moment never comes, if the other person remains locked in their own bitterness, frozen in the narratives they've built, then hear this clearly. It is not your responsibility to rescue them. You are not required to shrink so others feel tall. You are not obligated to overextend yourself just to fill someone else's emotional void. As Marcus Aurelius wisely said, the opinion of 10,000 men is of no value if none of them knows anything about the subject. In the same way, the approval of others means nothing if it costs you your peace. You were never meant to live for applause. You were never designed to carry the projections of others as if they were your own truth. When someone resents you for being visible, for being grounded, for being whole, remember, their struggle is not a reflection of your failure. It is a signal, a mirror, of their own inner disconnect. Maybe it's rooted in insecurity, maybe in jealousy, in trauma, or unhealed wounds. Whatever the source, it reveals far more about them than it does about you. In those moments, boundaries become an act of compassion, not only for yourself but for them too, because you cannot grow if you are constantly pulled into someone else's emotional storm. So protect your energy, be kind but clear, empathize but don't absorb. Offer support, but only when it's welcome. And above all, do not abandon your clarity to fix someone who resents the light you carry. At the end of the day, focus on building relationships rooted in honesty, mutual respect, and emotional balance. Let go of the need to be understood by everyone. Let go of the pressure to be liked by those who haven't yet liked themselves. Some people will dislike you simply because your presence reminds them of the parts of themselves they've ignored. That's not cruelty. That's just truth. So keep showing up with quiet strength, with unwavering integrity, with excellence, even when no one is watching, even when no one says thank you, because recognition may come, or it may not. But a life built on virtue, on stillness, on self-awareness and resilience doesn't need applause to be worthy. You were not born to be everyone's favorite. You were born to be free, and that is enough. As we close, remember, this The reasons someone may resent you often reveal far more about their pain than your path. So walk forward, not to be seen, not to be praised, but because you know who you are, with quiet strength, with clarity, with compassion. Honor those who see you clearly, and release, with love, those who don't. My name is Sunny. Though I live in a modern world, I find deep wisdom in the ancient philosophy of Stoicism. If this video resonated with you, please consider subscribing to my channel, The Stoic HAVENWAY, so we can explore this meaningful and transformative Stoic journey together. Drop a comment below, whether it's your thoughts or simply the words "inner peace," to mark this moment of reflection. And when you're ready, the next video awaits, to guide you even deeper into clarity, courage, and calm. Thank you so much for being here.